March 6, 1945. 3:47 p.m. Cologne Cathedral Square, Germany. The vision block of Feldwebel Karl Hoffmann's Panther cracked into a spiderweb pattern as he leaned in close, trying to make out a shape moving through the debris-filled street. For 3 years he had drilled every American tank outline into memory. He knew the high-riding Sherman with its 75mm gun, the Stuart light tanks the Tiger crews mocked as toy, Panzers, and even the thick-skinned jumbo Shermans that still couldn't break a Tiger's front plate at more than 500 Meter. But this was different. "Das ist kein Sherman," Hoffmann whispered into the intercom. His crew could hear the tremor in his voice, something they had never heard before. Through the fractured scope, he studied the machine. Its gun was longer and wider than anything he had seen on American armor. The hull sat low and sharp-edged with sloped armor that looked cast rather than welded. The turret was massive, almost oversized, like someone had mounted an anti-aircraft weapon on top of a tank body. Hoffmann's brain scrambled through every recognition chart, silhouette, and intelligence briefing. Nothing fit. In just 18 seconds, he and his men would learn the truth. The Americans finally had a tank that could destroy them at any range, from any angle. Another crew had already discovered this 3 minutes earlier. The Panther, commanded by Wilhelm Bartelborth of Panzer Brigade 106, had gone up in flames. None of its 5-man crew lived to tell what killed them. The answer was the M26 Pershing. Its 90mm M3 gun fired first. The armor-piercing round left the barrel at 853 ms, crossing the 120 mm gap in less than a blink. It slammed into the Panther's frontal turret armor. The 100mm plate, which had shrugged off dozens of Sherman shells in France and Belgium, cracked wide open. The round still carried enough force to rip through the crew space before detonating. At that moment, the balance of armored warfare shifted. Victory would no longer be written by German technical superiority, but by American industrial output and battlefield encounters that overturned every assumption soldiers held about their machines, their war, and their survival. German armored dominance had started back in August 1942, when the first Tiger I rolled into action at Leningrad. For 212 years, heavy German tanks seemed untouchable. Their 88mm guns could shred any Allied vehicle at distances beyond 2,000 mm. Their thick armor, 100mm on the front hull and 120mm on the turret, made them nearly invulnerable to standard Allied weapons. But the real power was psychological. Veterans of Schwer Panzerabteilung 506 spoke about the sense of invincibility inside a Tiger. The math backed them up. The Sherman's 75mm M3 could only pierce a Tiger's frontal armor under 100 mm, and only with special ammunition at perfect angles. Meanwhile, the Tiger's 88mm KWK-36 had no trouble destroying a Sherman head-on at 2,000 m. By late 1944, German crews had perfected their tactics. They parked Tigers and King Tigers at long range, using superior optics to pick off Allied tanks before they could even get close. A single Tiger could delay entire Allied columns. The most famous case was at Villers-Bocage in June 1944. SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann, in one Tiger, destroyed 14 tanks, 2 anti-tank guns, and 13 vehicles in less than 15 minutes. Though Wittmann would die in August 1944, months before the Pershing appeared, his reputation fueled the myth of German armored invulnerability. That myth cut both ways. Allied tank crews developed Tiger fever, often misidentifying any German vehicle as a Tiger and over-reporting encounters. German crews, meanwhile, began to believe they were untouchable, painting kill marks on their barrels like fighter aces. But across the ocean, 8,000 kilometers away in Detroit, American engineers had been secretly working since September 1942 on the project labeled T-26. Their mission, to end German armored superiority. The M26 Pershing was born from the harsh truth that U.S. armor had fallen behind. The Sherman, designed in 1941 when the Panzer IV with a short 75mm gun was the main threat, was now hopelessly outdated. By Italy and Normandy, Shermans were overmatched in firepower, armor, and range. The Pershing program became a massive national effort. 14 prime contractors, 300 subcontractors, and more than 50,000 workers across 22 states contributed. General Motors' Fischer Body Division, which had built Shermans at Grand Blanc Arsenal in Michigan, was ordered to retool immediately. Everything changed. New casting for the turret, a redesigned transmission, and most importantly, the integration of the 90mm gun, previously reserved for anti-aircraft and tank destroyers. That 90mm M3 was a leap forward. Derived from the proven 90mm AA gun, it fired a 24-pound armor-piercing shell at over 2800 FTS. The standard M82 APC round could punch through 119mm of armor at 500 weight, enough to break a Tiger's frontal protection. The newer T-30E16 HVAP, with its tungsten carbide core, could pierce 221mm at the same range, threatening even the King Tiger. The program was hidden under extreme secrecy. At Fischer Arsenal, workers were told they were building an improved Sherman. Components were spread across separate factories, so no single group saw the whole design. By January 1945, the first 20 Pershings were shipped to Europe under heavy security. On January 15, 1945, in New York, they were loaded under darkness. Each was sealed in waterproof wrapping, marked with false codes and described as heavy maintenance gear. The crews had been training at Fort Knox since November under strict isolation, sworn to secrecy on penalty of court-martial. The journey took 11 days through U-boat-infested waters. The Pershings were hidden deep in the ship's holds behind rows of standard Shermans, so secret that even most of the ship's crew didn't know they were there. During the voyage, the Pershing crew studied German armor charts and rehearsed their cover story. They were simply replacement Sherman crews. What emerged in Cologne in March 1945 was the machine that finally ended the German heavy tank legend. The Pershings landed in Antwerp on January 26, 1945, once again under complete secrecy and cover of darkness. From the port, they were moved by special trains to the 3rd Armored Division's maintenance zone near Düren, Germany. There, the crews carried out final checks while Major General Maurice Rose, the division commander, personally briefed battalion leaders on the arrival of this new weapon. By February 25, 1945, the first 4 Pershings were handed out to the 3rd Armored Division during its advance toward the Rhine. Each was placed with a different task force, carefully hidden among standard Sherman units. Orders were strict. These new tanks were not to be risked in ordinary combat. They were to reveal themselves only against German heavy armor. To keep appearances, crews painted them in the usual olive drab with standard unit markings. Even so, their lower silhouettes and longer barrels made them stand out to anyone who knew what to look for. German intelligence had completely missed their existence. Despite running one of the most effective intelligence systems of the war, the Wehrmacht never discovered that America had secretly built a heavy tank. German commanders believed the U.S. would stick to its quantity over quality doctrine forever. The idea that American factories could roll out Shermans in massive numbers and at the same time produce heavy tanks was beyond their imagination. February 26, 1945, near Elsdorf, Germany, brought the Pershing's first combat loss. A T-26E3, nicknamed Fireball, was destroyed in a sudden ambush by a Tiger I at close range. An 88mm round smashed through its mantlet, killing both the gunner and loader. Even so, the tank was recovered, repaired, and astonishingly returned to action by March 7th. It was a clear example of how efficient U.S. recovery and repair operations had become. Within days, German headquarters started receiving scattered reports of an American tank that didn't match any known model. One Panther crew described being destroyed by a single shot from 1-800. Others said the same thing. This new American vehicle carried a gun much longer and heavier than the familiar Sherman 75mm. Then came March 6, 1945, the battle that would be caught on film and become the most famous tank duel of the war. At Cologne Cathedral Square, German forces placed their last tanks in defensive positions. Wilhelm Bartelborth of Panzer Brigade 106 commanded a Panther from behind rubble, confident that the open square gave his crew the advantage. At 15:20 hours, Bartelborth spotted movement near the ruined Excelsior Hotel. Through his periscope, he reported what looked like a modified Sherman with a longer gun. At 300 mm point-blank range for his 75mm high-velocity cannon, he ordered his gunner to fire. The shell slammed into the advancing tank's front armor, then ricocheted away in a shower of sparks. Bartelborth had just seconds to realize what that meant before the return shot came. Staff Sergeant Robert Earley, commanding Pershing Eagle 7, already had him in the sights. Corporal Clarence Smoyer, the gunner, squeezed the trigger. The 90mm shell tore straight through the Panther's mantlet. The tank went up in flames as its ammunition ignited. Jim Bates, a U.S. Signal Corps cameraman, captured the entire engagement on film. The footage shows what followed. Another German tank tried to join the fight. Accounts differ whether it was a Tiger or another Panther, but it too was knocked out with a single frontal shot from Eagle 7. In less than 5 minutes, the Pershing had shown it could beat German armor head-on. News of the Cologne duel spread quickly and created shockwaves in German command. Oberkommando West sent urgent messages demanding immediate reports of any encounters with new American heavy tanks. The accounts they received painted a troubling picture. American vehicles armed with 90mm class guns, capable of destroying Panthers and Tigers frontally at over 1/500 dAus. Crews in the field started calling it the long gun Sherman, unable to believe it was an entirely new tank. This misidentification led to serious tactical mistakes, as German units tried to fight Pershings using old anti-Sherman tactics. The training schools were completely unprepared. No recognition charts existed for the Pershing, no manuals warned of its capabilities. Doctrine still assumed American guns couldn't penetrate German heavy tanks from the front. By mid-March 1945, around 20 Pershings were operating in Europe, with more arriving steadily. On paper, that was nothing compared to the thousands of Shermans, but the effect was far greater than numbers. German tank crews who once went into battle with total confidence now faced doubt in every engagement. The results showed. In the limited number of duels where Pershings fought German armor, they consistently achieved favorable kill ratios, though the small sample size made full statistical analysis unreliable. What mattered most was the uncertainty. At range, Germans often couldn't tell a Pershing apart from a Sherman, which slowed their decision-making and undermined morale. Production figures sealed the issue. By early 1945, German factories could barely assemble 100 tanks per month. The U.S., by contrast, produced 2,222 M26 Pershings by the end of the war. At Fischer Body's Grand Blanc arsenal alone, 1,739 rolled out. German crews who learned these numbers from captured records or interrogations knew they were up against not just superior machines, but an industrial base capable of replacing losses at a rate Germany could never match. When the first damaged Pershings were captured, German engineers examined their components closely. The findings stunned them. The one-piece cast turret required production techniques Germany had never developed for large armor sections. The Ford GAF V8 engine produced 500 horsepower with a level of reliability German engines couldn't sustain. The transmission, though highly complex, worked flawlessly. Every part showed advanced engineering. The gun stabilization system let Pershings fire accurately on the move, something even the Tiger couldn't do. Its powered traverse could swing the turret a full 360 degrees in just 15 seconds. Optics were equal to German standards. Inside, the tank revealed details that shocked the evaluators. The crew space was roomy and better arranged than German vehicles. Ammunition racks used wet stowage to reduce fires, a safety measure German tanks never had. Even padded surfaces and interior lighting showed a focus on crew comfort that German designers had completely ignored. Word of these discoveries spread fast through the Panzerwaffe. Morale, already battered by shortages and retreats, took another heavy blow. The Pershing had proven not only that American tanks could stand toe-to-toe with Germany's best, but that U.S. industry could deliver them in numbers Germany could never hope to equal. Tank crews who had managed to keep their fighting spirit alive despite overwhelming odds now faced a completely different reality. The Americans had taken away the one advantage they relied on most. For years, German battlefield doctrine was built on the belief that superior tank design could balance out being outnumbered. Defensive plans assumed Tigers and Panthers would destroy U.S. tanks from long range without taking return fire. Offensive plans depended on heavy armor punching through Allied lines while keeping losses manageable. By 1945, both assumptions were falling apart. The psychological shift became clear in the field. Reports increased of crews abandoning tanks over minor mechanical issues. Breakdowns that once would have been repaired under fire were now treated as total losses. Recovery teams often found German tanks left behind with only loose tracks, thrown treads, or empty fuel tanks. Problems crews would have fixed just weeks earlier. By late March 1945, as American forces advanced toward the Rhine, German tank crews found themselves trapped in an impossible situation. They were ordered to hold river crossings and bridgeheads, but they no longer knew what kind of enemy armor they were facing. Every encounter became a gamble. Were the approaching vehicles regular Shermans or the new Pershings? The fear repeated across the front. Positions that should have held for days collapsed in hours. Tanks that once fought until the last shot were now retreating at first sight of American armor. In numbers, the effect of about 20 Pershings among thousands of American tanks was negligible. But psychologically it was devastating. By April 1945, organized German armored resistance in the West was collapsing. Crews often refused to engage unless commanders guaranteed there were no Pershings present. Since such certainty was impossible, many units effectively stopped offensive operations altogether. The battle for Dessau from April 21st to 24th showed this new reality clearly. German defenders had Panthers and Tigers still in working order, yet they stayed in static defensive positions and avoided duels at range. The American attack, mixed forces of Shermans and Pershings, met little resistance. Instead of fighting, German crews withdrew, unwilling to risk running into heavy U.S. tanks. Even celebrated tank aces with dozens of kills abandoned their vehicles rather than take the chance of facing Pershings. At times, the mere rumor of Pershings being present was enough to force withdrawals. The Panzerwaffe that had stormed across France in 1940 and nearly destroyed the Soviet Union in 1941 had lost its confidence completely. By late April and early May 1945, German tank crews surrendered in the thousands. Interrogations carried out by U.S. Army intelligence revealed just how deeply the discovery of American heavy tanks had broken them. Veterans described the moment as a turning point. For 3 years, even when outnumbered, even when retreating, they believed their Tigers gave them the edge. Once they realized the Americans had tanks equal or better, they felt the war was unwinnable. Interestingly, many German crews admitted they never actually saw a Pershing in combat. It was the uncertainty, the not knowing whether the next American tank was a Sherman or a Pershing, that shaped their decisions. The doubt alone neutralized their will to fight. What they didn't understand until after the war was the true scale of U.S. tank production. Only 310 Pershings reached Europe before Germany's surrender, with about 20 entering combat. But by October 1945, American factories had built over 2,200 M26 tanks. At Fischer Body's Grand Blanc arsenal, 1,139 units rolled out, while Chrysler's Detroit tank arsenal added another 473. Once the assembly lines were fully switched over, a Pershing could be built in hours, whereas Germany's Tigers took weeks to finish. In total, Germany built only 347 Tiger I and 492 King Tiger tanks during the entire war. American industrial capacity was on another level. The ability to shift from Sherman to Pershing production without losing volume demonstrated flexibility the Germans simply could not match. Veterans who survived the war often looked back on learning about American heavy tanks as the key moment their faith collapsed. These were not inexperienced or easily rattled crews. They were hardened professionals with years of experience in armored warfare. They described their mindset as split into 2 phases, before and after. Before the Pershings, they still believed superior technology could turn the tide. After, they fought only to survive, avoiding combat wherever possible. Their reaction stood in stark contrast to other Allied advantages. They had adjusted to Allied numerical superiority with new tactics. They adapted to air supremacy by moving at night and hiding their vehicles. But facing parity in tank design, the one area they had counted on since 1942, there was no adjustment possible. Nothing symbolized this collapse better than the fate of King Tiger crews in the war's final weeks. The King Tiger, weighing 68 tons with massive armor and a long-barreled 88mm gun, had dominated battlefields. Its 150mm frontal armor was virtually immune to attack from the front. Yet in April 1945, even King Tiger crews hesitated to fight. The possibility of meeting a Pershing with its powerful 90mm gun caused paralysis. Crews that once attacked with confidence now second-guessed every engagement. Post-war studies showed just how blind German intelligence had been. Despite extensive spy networks and signals intelligence, the Wehrmacht completely missed the Pershing program. They also misunderstood American industrial strength. They assumed mass production meant lower quality, never imagining the U.S. could build heavy tanks while still producing in huge numbers. By April 1945, German armored units were breaking apart even when no Pershings were present. The simple appearance of American tanks of any type was enough to trigger withdrawals. Tank commanders used minor breakdowns as excuses to abandon vehicles rather than risk combat. Crews even reported enemy heavy tanks in areas where only Shermans operated. The arrival of the Pershing marked not just a technical development, but the collapse of the one psychological pillar holding up German armored resistance. Ironically, the psychological weight of the Pershing was far greater than its battlefield results. Although the tank was superior to many German designs in important ways, it had its own flaws. The transmission was prone to failure, leading to breakdowns. Its 90mm gun was strong, but it fired more slowly than the German 88mm. The armor was well sloped, but still thinner than the King Tiger's protection. From a technical standpoint, the Pershing was closer to the Panther, better in some areas, weaker in others. It was not the unstoppable super tank German crews imagined it to be. But what mattered was not the technical comparison. The shock came from seeing American tanks reach a level Germany had never expected. Only about 20 Pershings ever fought in Europe, making statistical analysis almost meaningless. Kill ratios can't be reliably compared with such small numbers. The real factor was perception. German tank crews believed the Americans had caught up, or even surpassed them, and this belief changed their behavior more than the machines themselves. The Pershing's arrival accelerated surrender. Crews who were willing to keep fighting with Tigers and Panthers against Shermans now chose to give up when they thought they faced Pershings. The reasoning was simple. Fighting Shermans meant some chance of survival. Fighting an equal tank meant near certain death. This mindset spread quickly across the front. Tank crews, once considered among the most determined fighters in the Wehrmacht, became more likely to surrender than the infantry. By late April, U.S. intelligence officers noted a striking reversal. German tank crews often arrived at prisoner collection points before infantry from the same divisions, something unheard of earlier in the war. The psychological effect was even sharper for units transferred from the Eastern Front. Against the Soviets, German armor still dominated. Crews arriving from Russia were confident, having destroyed huge numbers of Soviet tanks, including modern T-34-85s and IS-2s. Schwere Panzerabteilung 503, transferred west in March 1945, had destroyed hundreds of Soviet vehicles and considered itself nearly invincible. Yet within weeks of arrival in Germany, the unit's effectiveness collapsed after hearing reports of American heavy tanks. The contrast between their experience in the East and what they now faced in the West created shock. These men had no trouble against Soviet armor, yet against Americans they were suddenly unsure. The thought that U.S. industry had produced tanks that could match or surpass German designs, while still flooding the battlefield with overwhelming numbers, convinced many that they faced an unstoppable force. Word about the Pershing spread fast inside the Panzerwaffe. Every new report added to the unease. Crews heard about the stabilized gun that allowed accurate fire on the move, the improved transmission, the more comfortable crew space. They learned about infantry telephones mounted at the rear of the tank, allowing direct cooperation between soldiers and tank crews, something German armor never had. They discovered that Pershings used wet ammunition storage, which prevented catastrophic fires and improved crew survival, a feature missing in German tanks. None of these details were game-changing by themselves, but together they showed that American engineers had not only caught up, but in some areas, surpassed German thinking. For crews who had been told for years that German engineering was unmatched, these discoveries were devastating. The belief that German tanks would always hold a technological edge had been broken. The final battles of April 1945 highlighted the change. Tiger and Panther crews who once stalked Shermans with confidence now hesitated. Doctrine demanded they fire first at the most dangerous target, but uncertainty paralyzed them. Was the tank in the distance just another Sherman, or was it a Pershing? That pause often cost them the first shot, and sometimes their lives. Even when no Pershings were present, the fear of them changed outcomes. Post-war historians studying German records confirmed the effect. In the 2 months before Pershings appeared, German tank units in the West still maintained higher levels of operational readiness, despite shortages. After Pershing reports circulated, readiness dropped sharply, with many tanks abandoned for minor issues rather than lost in combat. The crew's confidence in their technology had kept them fighting through years of retreat. When that confidence was shattered, morale collapsed completely. In memoirs and reunions after the war, German veterans often pointed to this as the moment they realized defeat was inevitable. Again and again they repeated the same idea. Technological superiority had been their last hope, and the Pershing destroyed it. Many expressed disbelief that American factories in Detroit, run by ordinary workers in an industrial democracy they had been taught to despise, had produced tanks that could rival the Tigers. That realization was more demoralizing than any single battlefield defeat. What they didn't know at the time was even more crushing. The Pershing was only the beginning of U.S. heavy tank development. The T-26E4 Super Pershing with an upgraded 90mm gun was built in 25 units, with one fighting in Europe. The T-26E5 with armor increased up to 279mm had 27 prototypes. The T-29 armed with a 105mm gun was already in prototype form. The T-30 mounting a massive 155mm gun was also in development. American design had not just caught up, it was advancing further while still maintaining production levels Germany could not hope to match. The true picture lay in production facilities. By April 1945, U.S. tank plants covered over 50 million square feet of space. The scale of this industrial power ensured that once the Pershing appeared, Germany had no path to regain its edge. The Detroit tank arsenal alone represented more capacity than much of Germany's tank industry. Fischer Body had retooled entire automobile factories for tank production within months, something German industry never came close to matching. Beyond the technical and battlefield impact, the Pershing created a deep moral crisis for German tank crews. They had been told they were fighting for German technological and racial superiority, but the appearance of powerful American tanks, built by people Nazi propaganda dismissed as inferior, shattered the very ideology that had fueled their will to fight. This contradiction was especially severe for Waffen-SS tank crews, who had been chosen not only for skill, but also for loyalty to Nazi beliefs. These men had accepted racial theories as justification for their actions, yet the presence of American heavy tanks challenged their entire worldview. If the United States could build tanks equal or superior to German designs, what did that say about the supposed superiority of the German race? The final accounting of the Pershing's role shows a layered story. In total, 310 Pershings reached Europe before Germany's surrender, but only about 20 actually fought in combat. With numbers that small, claims about kill ratios or statistics hold little meaning. What mattered was not how many German tanks the Pershings destroyed, but the way their very existence altered morale and tactical decisions. German records show a clear increase in abandoned vehicles in areas where Pershings were rumored to be operating. Surrenders rose sharply after news of the tank spread. Operational readiness across panzer divisions dropped, though supply shortages and battlefield pressure also played roles. Still, the presence of a new American heavy tank pushed already strained morale past the breaking point. The irony was that Germany did have advanced tank designs on the drawing board that might have matched or even beaten the Pershing. Projects like the Panther II, E-50, and E-75 offered technical promise, but they existed only as prototypes or paper concepts. By the time Pershings rolled into combat, those German designs were too few and too late to matter. This contrast revealed the fundamental difference between German and American approaches to warfare. Germany aimed for perfection in individual weapons, chasing technical superiority. The United States aimed for mass production of weapons that were good enough to win. Once American engineers reached parity with the Pershing, while keeping production at unmatched levels, Germany's resistance became mathematically impossible. The shock of discovering American heavy tanks left long-term effects on German military thinking. After the war, the new Bundeswehr adopted the lesson that technology alone could not be relied upon as a permanent advantage. A deep respect for American industrial strength became part of German doctrine and remains to this day. Some German veterans who later immigrated to the United States admitted that what they saw during the war influenced their decision. The industrial might behind the Pershing symbolized a system that combined democracy with prosperity, and still produced weapons equal to anything Germany had created. Today, surviving Pershings stand in museums around the world. At Fort Knox, one sits beside a captured King Tiger. The placard may describe them as roughly equal in capability, but what it cannot explain is the psychological revolution the Pershing caused. German veterans visiting such displays often recalled the shock of first learning about America's heavy tanks. The Pershing represented more than just a machine. It was proof of American industry's ability to match German quality while maintaining overwhelming output. The numbers tell the story clearly. Only 20 Pershings fought in Europe, yet 310 arrived before victory in Europe Day. By October 1945, total production had reached 22 M26 tanks. Fischer Body's Grand Blanc plant produced 1,739 Pershings on its own, while Chrysler built another 473. Compare that to Germany's total production of 1,147 Tiger I tanks and 492 King Tigers across the entire war. The psychological effect of these figures was devastating. German tankers realized that while they struggled to keep their Tigers running, America could mass-produce heavy tanks without pause. This knowledge alone was as damaging as combat losses. The last confirmed tank duel between a Pershing and German armor happened in late April 1945, with the war almost over. By then, the psychological damage had already been done. German tankers who had once entered the war confident in their superiority ended it knowing American industry had caught up, and perhaps surpassed them. The Pershing story is one of psychological warfare as much as battlefield impact. It proved that morale could collapse even when only 20 tanks actually saw combat. In just 8 weeks from the first appearance of the Pershing in late February to Germany's surrender in early May, German tank crews went from hunters to hunted. For years they had fought against overwhelming numbers, clinging to their belief in German technological dominance. When that belief was broken, their will to fight collapsed. In the end, the M26 Pershing achieved something that thousands of Shermans could not. It broke the spirit of the Panzerwaffe, not by sheer numbers, not by outmaneuvering, but by showing, undeniably, that American democracy and industry could build tanks every bit as powerful as Germany's finest. The long 90mm gun that German crews glimpsed through their periscopes wasn't just a weapon. It was the symbol of an era ending. In those final battles, the myth of German invincibility died. The hunters became the hunted, and they knew it. The Pershing stands today as proof of a fundamental truth. Technological superiority is always temporary, but industrial strength and innovation endure. German tankers learned that lesson in the hardest possible way, while staring down the barrel of an American 90mm gun.